I want to share a bit about some of our earliest experiments. When we first started, we had to start from the ground floor because no one had actually done this before. So we started with some seeds and leaves and water, and my first experiments were conducted with Dr. Gary Schwartz, a psychologist at the University of Arizona. Gary, it's great to have you with me.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
We've done so many experiments together, and you were really the first scientist to step up to do this with me, which I'm continue to be grateful for. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that you've tried to measure it? What kind of equipment did you use?
Well, there are various approaches to see the effects of intention on the physical world. There are measures of literally light itself, or electromagnetic fields. So we would measure, for example, leaves glowing in the dark, measuring subtle light that was emitted from leaves called biophotons. Or we would measure water using a device that literally passed a current through the electric water, through the water, producing essentially a glow, which you again would measure in this case optically with cameras. It's a contemporary Kirlian photography system. Or we would measure natural systems like the growth of seeds, so you could quantify precisely their rate of sprouting and rate of growth. And so we would measure these various kinds of parameters to get an objective measure of the effects of intention in the physical world.
And we were trying to see whether or not we could intend to increase the light coming off of a leaf. Do you want to talk about that? We had a control and we had a regular leaf. And do you remember what we did? This was back in 2007.
I was already doing research measuring various parameters related to intention and healing. It wasn't focused on distant intentionality, nor was it focused on groups. It was focused mostly on individuals. And one of the preparations that we used was this super low light CCD camera system. And what we wanted to do is to see whether you could use those same kinds of low light CCD cameras, and instead of pointing them out into deep space, point them out into and have them look, for example, at leaves. And what we found was that you could literally see plants glowing in the dark, that they were emitting this kind of light. And you could measure both what would happen if you wound the plant, like if you produce a tear or produce a cut. You could literally see the increased glowing in that region as the plant was attempting to heal itself. And so we decided to use that preparation with your spectacular collective long-distance group intention experiments.
And we had two sets of leaves, and we punctured them a certain amount of times so that we could have a measure of significance. You need to have a lot of data points in order to demonstrate that something really works in science, right?
And that's correct.
And we did this in front of an audience in London of about 400 or 500 people. And remember, you said, oh my goodness, the leaf scent intention was glowing so much compared to the other leaf. The other leaf looked like it was neglected.
And yes, it was breathtaking to see the dramatic difference between the two leaves with the naked eye. And now when I say with the naked eye, it's with the naked eye using the camera. We could never have seen any of this with the naked eye in a pitch black environment.
We did a number of these kinds of experiments with seeds and leaves, and then we wanted to move on to something practical, seeing whether we could make food grow more plentiful. And so we started on our seed experiment. So my first one was in Sydney, Australia. I was speaking in Sydney. Your seeds were in Tucson, Arizona. And so do you remember what happened?
Yes, it's very hard to forget. And the reason is because when we compared after 5 days following the intention, the 30 seeds that had been targeted compared to the 90, which were the controls, that on the average they had grown statistically significantly greater, i.e. they were blooming more rapidly than were the um, uh, matched controls. But as you will also recall, we did the exact same experiment, but when there was no overt external intention to take place. And when we did that, what we discovered was that uh, those seeds in general grew less robustly than both of the seeds that had been in the experimental group. And we tended to discover that over and over, with one critical exception. We found this generalization. So the seeds that were in the area of the targeted seeds were still benefiting somewhat compared to the matched no intention on no days control.
Gary,